My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Opportunities for Small F&B Producers to Engage in Culinary Diplomacy, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistant Program Manager and International Trade Assistant Director, Chris Van Orden.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this conversation about culinary diplomacy. As Sheila said, my name is Chris Van Orden, and I serve as both the Assistant Director of the International Program and Manager of the Craft Beverage Program at the Virginia SBDC. So today's program is going to be a free-flowing discussion about how small food and beverage producers, F&B, and retailers can benefit from participation in culinary diplomacy initiatives. Please, if you have any questions, use the Q&A function rather than the kind of comments, and we'll do our best to answer them all either during or after the webinar. So I'm very excited to welcome today's speaker. Tyler Savoy is a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran and currently serves as Senior Protocol Officer with the Major Events Division of the Office of the Chief of Protocol at the U.S. Department of State. Tyler led the establishment and launch of Secretary Blinken's Diplomatic Culinary Partnership and American Culinary Corps, a network of 83 distinguished chefs and culinary practitioners from across the country. Looking forward to this conversation, and welcome, Tyler.
Thanks so much, Chris. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Culinary diplomacy, right? This might be a new concept for some people. So before we dig in, it's probably a good idea to get a good working definition of what exactly we mean when we use that term, kind of both in the political, realm and also at the practical level.
Sure. So I think maybe the easiest term that I can use that is, maybe more widely understood is just culinary diplomacy at its root is soft power. And when I say soft power, in the world of geopolitics and international affairs, we have hard power, we have soft power. Hard power is obviously going to be things like bullets and guns and military and sanctions, things that are meant to be punitive in their nature. But soft power is, I like to believe, where all of the magic and the margins really happens. And culinary diplomacy in particular, it's this form of soft power that engages in just this range of public diplomacy tools that include food, statecraft, just engagement with local communities and small businesses. And our goal within the Office of the Chief of Protocol is to help advance those foreign policy goals of the United States by kind of creating this environment for successful diplomacy. And really, I think by serving on those front lines of diplomatic engagement, we have this really unique opportunity to promote cross-cultural exchange and build new bridges of understanding between people and governments around the world. I think personally, I always identify with Jose Andres's, goal in life of building bigger tables and having more people being able to be part of those conversations and be represented. And so, yeah, I think that in a nutshell is kind of a good definition that we can work from.
Yeah, that is helpful, and it's interesting to hear, this sort of connection between, the ground level, right, stuff and, lowercase c, capital C culture, and how that relates to sort of big political aims and everything. It's an interesting space. So, right, you've been working in this area for quite a while, and it's an interesting space. When you're kind of involved in a campaign, who is the audience? Like, who are these directed towards, right? Who is the sort of recipient of these initiatives?
Sure. So I think by nature of who the State Department is, our audience is almost always going to be foreign in nature. Um, we are America's preeminent international affairs organization. We are the first cabinet agency. Like, we oversee all of our embassies and consulates around the world. Like, our job is to represent America literally to the world. But I think where culinary diplomacy has this really unique engagement is, I've been in any number of meetings in, boardrooms in or conference rooms in like ministries of foreign affairs or ministries of defense, or, at these big multilateral summits, discussing issues, working through challenges. But time and time again, and I think if you ask any seasoned diplomat, they will echo this, that the most meaningful discussions I have ever had in my career have been sitting around a dinner table sharing food. And I'm going to try to not like quote Jose Andres throughout this whole experience, but he's a great guy and I think he has a lot of great perspective to offer. But Jose always talks about this concept that a shared plate of food is the truest form of democracy that can exist. You put aside, cultures, religions, nationalities, you know, anything that kind of, defines us through like differences. But you sit a group of people at a table and you put a plate of food there that is to be shared, and that is going to be people engaging in democracy in its purest form. And so I think for us, when we engage in culinary diplomacy, it is this opportunity for us as America's preeminent foreign affairs agency to say to the world that this is what food looks like in America. And I think we've been very intentional to really diversify that definition and broaden it so that it is a lot more representative of America. When we launched this program in 2022, early 2023, the years kind of blurred together at this point. But it's a partnership with the James Beard Foundation, which we're very fortunate to have them as just outstanding partners in this process. We really set out to diversify the core. And when I say, diversification, I don't just mean, men or women or, black, white, or Asian, but so many other manifestations of the word diversity. What part of the country are you from? What type of cuisine do you dabble in? How do you engage in the culinary arts? Where are you in your career? Like, what is your sexual orientation? What is your immigration status? What elements of the story do you bring to the overall, magnum opus of American food? And I think we were really, really successful in that. And I remain really proud of the group of people that we do have and that we are getting to work with, and that we are getting to, highlight and showcase for state dinners and state luncheons and other like, functions and affairs of state, but also get them overseas to our embassies and to our consulates to more directly represent America in a more targeted and strategic sort of way. So yeah, I think just lots of opportunities, but ultimately, while we do bring in a lot of domestic partners in the process, the audience that we are seeking to engage is foreign in nature.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely recommend anybody who wants to check it out should go see the group that they've assembled. It's a really impressive and interesting bunch of people. And those are, right, the people that you're engaging at this high marquee level. But we're going to talk about the full gamut of opportunities for companies to, get involved here because, it's not always, okay, you're a chef part of the core, but there's all kinds of things. So, and I really liked the points that you raised on the sort of the connections around the table. I think that's going to resonate with our audience for sure, because even within the local communities, everybody who works in food knows what a convener that space tends to be. But because we're talking with a lot of businesses today, and very well working with this community, food and beverage entrepreneurs only have so much time and so many resources. That's just the nature of the industry. So I think it's probably a good idea to talk about the sort of value proposition for the food and beverage people that you engage here. So in general, like what does a company stand to gain for, or what are the benefits that accrue to them by engaging in these culinary diplomacy efforts, whether, really high level or even kind of like fleeting engagement?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, Chris. And besides the limited time, the limited resources, I also recognize that in a post-pandemic world, the field of challenges that food and beverage companies in particular face is an arduous one. And I don't envy it. Like, I have a lot of friends who are chefs. I have a lot of friends who are food and beverage practitioners in various ways, friends who are farmers. And like, I know that it's not easy. But I think one of the big things that we bring to the table with this program are those opportunities for visibility. And I'm happy to kind of offer examples because I think those are going to be much more illustrative than me, just
Yeah.
talking about like conceptually. So, for example, this year the United States hosted the NATO summit. And it's hosting NATO is kind of a big deal. There's a lot of conversations, in the international space today about, the relevance of NATO. There's various opposition to NATO, but ultimately NATO is, the most successful international, military diplomatic alliance that has ever been established. And this year, NATO was celebrating 75 years of existence. So there were a lot of big opportunities for very real engagement. And there were three sort of ways that our team worked to bring culinary diplomacy into that sphere. One was in April, we took a group of chefs to Brussels to sort of do this culinary showcase of DC. The second was right before the summit in DC in July. We hosted a NATO night at Nationals Park for members of the NATO delegations. And then three, it's fairly common practice that when we host these big summits, we'll produce something that we call a delegate bag. And if you've ever been to like a conference or anything like that, and you receive a swag bag, very similar concept, just, a slightly different title. And so I can kind of talk about like ways that we brought, food and beverage folks and, creators and makers into those three different experiences. So first, for Brussels in April, we took, as I said, 4 chefs from DC to really showcase DC. And the chefs were Jerome Grant, who is maybe lesser known, but if you've ever been to the cafes at the Smithsonian's American Indian or African American museums, he is the genius behind those that really elevated that experience, made it cool, made it engaging, made it relevant, and not just kind of like boring museum cafeteria food. Daniela Senior, who runs a string of colada shops in the DC metropolitan area. So, kind of Cuban Caribbean food is the focus there. Johnny Sparrow, who is the chef at the Michelin-starred restaurant Reverie in Georgetown, and was running Bar Sparrow, sort of near the Capitol, that unfortunately closed recently. But Johnny's big wheelhouse is sustainability and seafood and just the whole mid-Atlantic, genre of food. And then Kevin Tien, who is the celebrated chef behind the restaurant Moon Rabbit here in DC. And in the process of setting that up, we engaged our colleagues at the Foreign Agricultural Service. And State Department is really good at bringing people together, but where Foreign Ag really shines is helping to advance and promote American products that they are seeking to have exported overseas. And so in that partnership, our sweet potatoes came from North Carolina, our almonds came from California, our beef came from, I forget whether it was Texas or Oklahoma, but somewhere in sort of the, like mid-America, Southwest sort of region. Our scallops came from a fishery in Massachusetts. We were able to get a number of American spirits from distilleries all across America. And we partnered with the Brewers Guild of Maine, who very generously packaged up 24 cases of amazing Maine beer and flew it over to Brussels. And so in that event, not only were we able to kind of highlight and showcase, here's all the things that make DC really special from a food and beverage perspective, but we were also able to highlight and showcase all of these American grown, American produced products that in many cases came from smaller operations. And we were able to say, like, this is the farm that these sweet potatoes came from. Like, here's a list of all the breweries from the beers in Maine. And that was really cool. Like, the audience really responded to it. And granted, many of them are, their focus in the international affairs realm is NATO specifically. But they still engage with, their delegate, like their countries back home. Like, they are a diplomatic delegation representing their country, but they still have engagements with their ministries of trade and ministries of commerce, however they manifest in those countries. So I think that was a really cool opportunity for us to get to engage in. And then when NATO was here in DC in July, we hosted this NATO night at Nationals Park, and it was sort of a like takeover of Nationals Park for like a Monday evening game. Besides the fact that it was swelteringly hot, it was also just a lot of fun. Secretary General Stoltenberg threw out the ceremonial first pitch. There was a lot of cool NATO swag that was being given out. And so we sort of did a sequel to what we did in Brussels, but here in DC. And so we tapped folks like Victor Albizu, who runs Taco Bombas, that are really, I think, in 5 different states at this point: North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, DC, Maryland, but is like really expanding out on that model. Mike Friedman, who runs All Purpose Pizzeria, the Red Hen. If anyone remembers when President Dr. Biden went out for dinner and they both got the same pasta dish and it caused this whole big row with a lot of people, that's one of his restaurants. Fernando and Debbie Gonzalez, who run 250 Barbecue. They have locations in Riverdale Park, Maryland, and now in DC. They have a really amazing story where they immigrated here from the United States. In 2018, they opened their restaurant in January of 2020. So the entire first year of being business owners, they were navigating, honestly, one of the most challenging global experiences that I think any business has ever really faced, but remained resilient and are very successful now. Juan Tang, who runs the Michelin-starred Rooster and Owl in DC, and also Ellie Bird and Falls Church. And then through the Beard Foundation, we brought in a guest chef, Violetta Edelman, who runs Dolcezza Gelato. Because I mean, what's better on a like hot day at a baseball game than, some ice cream? And so again, each of these folks did, signature dishes. In this case, we worked with the Beard Foundation to draw on, farmers that they are partners with, and producers that they are partners with, so that again, we were able to, everyone was using a product that, was made in America from American farms, from American producers. And so that was, again, a cool story to tell. And then I think the last thing that I mentioned, delegate bags are always this really cool opportunity. And for us, we have some very like specific rules about how these things can kind of come together. So because we are the United States government, anything that goes in that bag, to include the bag itself, has to be made in America. And in my time of doing delegate bags, both for NATO and also for APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, we have really sought to focus in on engagement almost exclusively with small businesses. And we strive to really give a preference to businesses that are owned by women, BIPOC owned businesses, LGBTQ plus owned businesses. For NATO in particular, veteran owned businesses was, very much, a win for us if we were able to bring that element into play. And when we, the US government, come in for something like this, like there were a lot of people that attended NATO. And so when we
Mhm.
come in for an order with a small business, um, we're not coming in saying, oh, we need 20 of this or 50 of that. Like we're coming in and saying, we need 2,000 of this.
Mhm.
And so it really represents this really cool opportunity for a small business to kind of elevate themselves and, exist on a level that maybe they had not existed before. Maybe they didn't believe that they had the capacity to exist in that sort of way. But in my experience, every time we have reached out and engaged in a small business or engaged a small business, that maybe vulnerably express some concern about their ability to engage, they have delivered every single time.
Mhm.
And those products always tend to be some of the most popular products that we are showcasing in these kinds of events. So I hope that those are like helpful examples of
Yeah.
tangible ways that we try to engage small businesses. And I think where the like what's in it for me with this type of engagement opportunity exists.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful to hear in practice and like three very different types of engagements. But right, I mean, yeah, maybe there's only a handful of actual chefs, but when you're highlighting local products or if there's any growers that are on the line, there's that angle here. And I think it's helpful to know that in and of itself, right, this might be the biggest order you get in a year. So like the sale alone justifies the exercise, never mind the exposure, never mind the opportunity to potentially reach a new market, right? If this product is getting featured somewhere and there's a lot of demand, like, well, hey, I didn't realize that Brussels really, really loves my barbecue sauce.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a there, right? It could lead to that. So I think there's all kinds of
Yeah.
benefits that can happen here. It's interesting to hear.
And I think maybe a good success story that I can kind of highlight and
Cool.
showcase. So, when you as a host country take on APEC, it's not just one like meeting that you're taking on hosting. Like APEC is really kind of a marathon sprint of multilateral like engagement. It's ultimately 5 clusters of meetings that happen throughout the course of a calendar year, and ideally it happens in 5 different cities, though depending on
Mhm.
the country that may or may not be possible. But for a country like the United States, like it's very easy for us to do something like that, because also it's a chance for us to bring the international community to different places that they might not experience otherwise. Like everyone's been to LA or everyone's been to
Mhm.
New York or DC, but not everyone has been to Honolulu and Palm Springs and Detroit and Seattle,
Mhm.
San Francisco. So that was a really cool opportunity. um, and each delegate bag that we sought to produce in the course of that year, um, we sort of set a rule that everything in the bag, including the bag, had to come from a vendor that was local to the city, state, or very immediate region.
Mhm.
So, like for Detroit, for example, everything had to come from Detroit, Michigan, or the like very close Great Lakes region.
Mhm.
We weren't going to be bringing something from Boston or Florida for something we hosted in Palm Springs. Like we wanted it to be reflective of that community.
Mhm.
Um, and I think my favorite of the clusters of meetings, because it was just a fun city to be in, period. But also, if you're going to have to be somewhere for a month, Seattle is a pretty great place to be.
Mhm.
And so, on an early kind of advanced trip, I observed in Pike Place Market this little company called Bite Society. And the owners of the company pre-pandemic were caterers. A lesbian couple who owns it, they engaged in
Mhm.
all kind of like different catering operations. Pandemic came along, their business completely evaporated. And they very smartly pivoted to this direct to consumer snack sales model. And in that, one, I think stroke of genius they had is like the packaging needed to be fun. Like it needed to be cool. It needed to be reflective of, their local community. So something
Mhm.
that they sought to do is for all of their packaging, the artwork on it is designed by local Seattle tattoo artist. And I thought that was really cool. I thought it was really, reflective of Seattle as a city and as a culture. And this was on a Sunday, and I said to myself, I need to come back here tomorrow. I need to like come talk to these folks. I think they would be really cool vendors to appear in the delegate bags. So I went back Monday. They were closed on Monday. I searched on Google and found what I thought was a storefront. It was their sort of warehouse and fulfillment center.
Mm-hmm.
In what I say is kind of a sketchy warehouse area, but I think it's just kind of a standard warehouse area. And so I went there, knocked on the door wearing a suit. They answered the door, and I was like, "Hi, my name is Tyler. I'm from the State Department, and I'm here to talk to you about your cookies." And after some conversation and me kind of convincing them that the State Department does not have anything to do with taxation and revenue, we had a very meaningful discussion. And ultimately, they were a vendor that supplied items for the delegate bags. In the course of this entire relationship, it put them on the radar for Visit Seattle, which is the destination marketing organization for the city of Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime any big like conventions or meetings or diplomatic summits like APEC are coming to town, um, they are the city's tourism and business like convention bureau.
Mm-hmm.
And they were super helpful in just all aspects of planning. But this put Bite Society on their radar, which opened all these new opportunities for business engagement for them. Now when representatives of Visit Seattle travel places, they have cookies from Bite Society in these little packets that they leave as like gifts.
Mm-hmm.
It's become a very common like giveaway item for them. It got them on the radar of Argosy Cruises, which go all throughout the Puget Sound in Alaska. So their stuff is being sold there. They will be one of the vendors for the World Cup when Seattle is one of the host cities. And one of the meetings that happens in the cluster of meetings that occurred in Seattle is a small and medium enterprise ministerial meeting. And so the folks running that meeting brought Lindy, who is one of the owners of Bite Society, to come speak as a panelist. And at the end of that meeting, she was approached by folks from the ministries of trade in Japan, Korea, and Singapore, who all wanted to know how they could work with Bite Society for Bite Society to export their products to those countries. And I mean, that's like a really cool success story because often, as I said, when we come in and we put in an order for something, it's it's typically larger than any order that they've ever received. To use like a NATO example, there's a company called Pops Praiseworthy. It's Northern Virginia based, and they make kettle corn. And that was one of the things that went into the NATO bag. And the order that we put in was more than double the largest order that company had ever received. And I think there was, understandably some anxiety about being able to deliver to that scale on the part of the woman who runs that company. But again, she delivered. It was super well received. And it also kind of gave her the confidence to like grow and expand her operations, which, to me is always going to be a great success story. If, us getting to highlight and showcase, a creator and their product to the world leads to that kind of result, then, I think we are doing our job effectively.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's really helpful to show people like how just being open to these kinds of opportunities, right? The immediate sort of benefits, but then the long term, the exposure. I think that the fact that you're working with groups like the Beard Foundation, you mentioned sort of tourism boards. I think that's a great thing. Everybody in Virginia, if you're not connected with the Virginia Tourism Corporation and your local regional tourism groups, your destination marketing groups, whatever that might be, they are a fantastic asset that can help to expose you to broader audiences. And you never know what's going to come from that because there are people like Tyler that are out there that are looking to highlight really compelling, interesting food brands. And there's only so many hours in the day. And, you can pound the pavement and find a really cool brand, but like when you have to find 100 to feature, that's very hard. And
Yeah.
somebody did ask this question, and I think people are interested, is how do small local brands become eligible or apply to be a part of the product bags you mentioned, or to just generally engage? And I think that, hey, if people are interested in the concept here, sort of how you go about finding these companies, what characteristics are you looking for, or those that you avoid, and how can companies kind of make themselves more visible or opt into these things, whether through partners, finding these things, the sort of finding a way to make the sort of two ends meet.
Yeah. And that's a fair question, Chris. And it's like, it's not entirely an easy answer because like no experience is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
With all of these bags, like with bags or with culinary diplomacy, any way that I think we as the Department of State are working to engage food and beverage folks, there's always these foreign policy goals that we are trying to achieve. And we're trying, like, again, as the Office of the Chief of Protocol, we are looking to establish this landscape for successful diplomacy. And that manifests in every single detail, like things down to like what color tablecloth are we using? What type of coffee are we serving at the end of the event? What type of entertainment are we like? There's so many just little nuanced details that go into it. But one thing I will say, and you sort of hit the nail on the head here, Chris, is there are so many hours in the day, and we are not a huge team of people. And while we are capable of, various degrees of, small business engagement magic and diplomatic sorcery, there's only so much that we can do in the course of a day. And I have a pretty good memory. And so like I will always remember, companies that I've had exposure to, but there's so many more companies that exist out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we are looking to host something, especially if it's in a city that's not DC, but also now if it is a city that is DC, we will always engage a like business development council or a destination marketing organization because they will always have relationships with all of these companies. They, if we say, hey, we are looking for A, B, and C, it's so easy for them to come and say, oh, well, we'd recommend companies 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 for your consideration. Another thing that is always helpful for us is some of the vetting that we have to do is sort of already done for us in that sort of way. And when I
Mm-hmm.
say vetting, I don't just mean, oh, like, is this company fairly paying wages to its employees? Like, are they
Mm-hmm.
properly paying their taxes? Because those are certainly things that we will consider because ultimately, events that we are doing this on behalf of the president, on behalf of the first lady, on behalf of the vice president, the secretary of state. And we have to operate at, a fairly high level of effectiveness for this. And we don't want to put something out there where someone is not fairly paying wages to their employees or not actually paying their taxes or engaging in discriminatory business practices, whatever it may be. But I also mean vetting in the case of capacity. Like if we come in and say, hey, we need to put in an order for 3,000 of these items, like, does that business actually have the capacity to deliver? Or does that put them in an unfair spot? Like, I get that an opportunity like this is an opportunity that anyone would really want to pursue, but are they actually able to deliver at that level? Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just all the different details of like, everything has to be made in America. We try and use sustainable packaging for things like, we often like to customize products to, feature the particular event that we're doing. Um, just lots of those little details. So, I will definitely echo what you said, Chris, that, if you were not on the radar of, a local, state, commonwealth, or, national business development council, or, some kind of local or regional destination marketing organization, every time I have become boots on the ground in any city to like advance and prepare for some type of event, and we start having these conversations, these are the folks I immediately turn to ask what's cool on the local scene.
Yeah.
And they often just have a lot of great ideas. And sometimes it takes, a little massaging and a little finesse to, get more what we're looking for. But they have all the ideas, and they know all the companies. They can put us in touch with all of these folks. Um, and I've never had someone recommend a company that has turned out to be a bad experience for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's these groups that are out there that can make the path easier for you all, get or help to whittle down the massive universe of potential companies to feature. And I mean, it's in their interest too. So I mean, I'll say in my experience, I used to work for a brewery in Northern Virginia, and being well connected to the town's visitors bureau opened so many doors over the years, right? Just being willing to, hey, we have a group coming through. We're looking for a cultural activity afterwards. Can they come by? Of
Yeah.
course. And then when they get opportunities, you're top of mind. It's just relationship building, kind of thinking about the long term for all of that. And I think you mentioned, the sort of grower side and featuring of local products and the, made in America, grown in America. If you're using agricultural products that are made in Virginia, right? You have your Virginia grown designations and thinking about what they could do for you. If you're using local value chains or doing anything that's culturally specific, like saying, hey, this is a classic Virginia recipe. Well,
Yeah.
all that stuff can help to make you rise to the top of the pile when it comes to being featured by in culinary diplomacy or tourism or whatever.
And I think so important also is just your story being something that's out there, because we are always going to look for something that has a good story to be able to tell. And again, to try and use tangible examples of specific cases. Um, Earlier this year, we hosted the president of Kenya, William Ruto, for a state visit here in DC. And it was the first state visit of an African head of state in, I think, 20 years, if I recall. Um, the last one being during the early years of the Bush administration.
Hmm.
Um, and there is a large Kenyan diaspora here in the United States, so much so that when President Ruto arrived in America, his first stop was not to DC, but to Atlanta, to engage with the Kenyan diaspora community there. There's a large number of Kenyans who work for the CDC that's based in Atlanta. And so, that was like a very important part of his visit. He had participated in an American exchange program sponsored through the US government. So, it was something he really believed in. And so we started looking for what would be a good way to highlight and showcase that. Whether it be at the state dinner that's hosted by the First Lady at the White House, or the state lunch that is co-hosted by the Vice President and the Secretary of State at the Department of State. And so we ultimately found this woman, Margaret, who is a Kenyan immigrant, moved here, I believe, when she was in high school, if I remember correctly. Um, and at some point in her career, realized that continuing to highlight and showcase her love of Kenyan traditions, was important to her. And how that manifested is she founded a coffee company called Kahawa.
Mhm.
And while they use, beans from other places as well, they also use a fair number of coffee beans from Kenya.
Mhm.
So a Kenyan immigrant who started a business with roots reaching back to Kenya using Kenyan products. And so when, I mentioned earlier, what type of coffee do we serve at things like this? Well, in this case, it was her coffee that we served,
Mhm.
to the vice president, the secretary of state, and the president of Kenya. When everyone left, there was a small bag of her coffee that everyone took with them and a small card about her and her business. And so if we have those kind of opportunities to highlight and showcase a business and kind of further America's foreign policy goals by telling a cool story that encapsulates the American spirit and the
Mhm.
American dream, then we are always going to look for that kind of opportunity to do that.
Yeah. I mean, thankfully, I would say food and beverage companies are probably more prone to including their personal story. Food is a space where it's right. It's not just you put it in a box and it's a better quality than this one and that's it, right? There's a lot of your personality that goes into that. So don't be shy. Not that you have to weaponize your past, but just right there's all these intangibles, all these soft things besides the product itself that makes you and your company appealing, and being able to tell that story can help because there's all kinds of connections that are going to arise from that. So
Yeah. And I would say, Chris, I don't think we would ever look at it as someone weaponizing their past.
yeah,
I think we would look at it as someone harnessing their story to enhance their product. If
yes.
we have two sweet potatoes sitting in front of us, one
Mhm.
from two, like each from a different farm, and we're having to choose, like, what are we going to use to incorporate for this state lunch? Like, if we're able to say, oh, this comes from a third generation farm in North Carolina, and like, here's all these cool
Yeah,
details about it, like, that's a story we're able to tell because it helps
yeah,
further like America as an identity and overall our foreign policy goals and whatever we're trying to achieve.
yeah.
So, you know, to harness in on what Chris said, like, do not be afraid to put your story out there, because that's
Mhm.
often what we're looking for and will often be like a deciding factor if we're faced with a choice
Yeah.
between similar products.
I mean, yeah, being anonymous about, right, this is just from a field somewhere. That's not a very compelling story. That's, it's from a warehouse. I don't know anything about the people. So, right, you're as much of an asset to your company as the product itself.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so if, right, a company gets an opportunity, maybe they don't get to jump straight into being a member of the Culinary Corps or anything like that. But hey, if there's a delegate bag that comes along, or if you're getting featured, Virginia Tourism Corporation, or let's say there's a visiting delegation that's coming through at the other side. Hey, who knows? Right? They want to do it right. They want this to lead to more opportunities. What can a F&B company do to make sure that it's a successful experience, that they get the next opportunity, that's not, not just, oh, I made the good sale, but this is going to lead to more and bigger things, and like the kind of bite society story of like the sort of cascading nature. What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say, Chris, is I think we are often creatures of habit in the US government. Like, when we find a company that we work well with and we have a good experience, we tend to be uh, we tend to replicate that experience. And we also tend to refer it to other folks, who may be engaging in a similar way, but maybe just not, the Department of State. Um, like, I'll get calls from like folks in other agencies being like, hey, I'm looking for this. And it gives me a chance to say, like, oh, you want to call so and so who produces such and such, because we had a great experience working with them. But it's also like kind of little things that maybe you wouldn't think about. Like, one thing, for example, like, I know when we reach out and say like, hi, my name is Tyler Savoy calling from the US Department of State, and I am calling with an opportunity for your product to be showcased for this like function of state hosted by the President of the United States. That's an exciting opportunity. Like, I get it. But for us, there are all of these, frankly, security concerns that come into play when we are doing something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and so, like, we have no issue whatsoever if a company wants to post about this opportunity after the event has concluded.
Hmm.
But often, like, because one of the ways that we will vet companies is like, we look at their social media, and like, we'll kind of follow their social media for a while. And if we see things cropping up there before the event, that's always kind of a challenge, because then we have to sort of call in this, like, big brother government sort of way and be like, I need for you to take this post down. And that's just always an uncomfortable conversation. But you know, being realistic about deadlines, like, you know, like, when I work with companies, I will always try and be as flexible as I can. I will always try and give as much lead time as I can. And I will be very clear, like, I need this delivered by X date and X time, no later, and in some cases, no sooner. Because also it becomes a question of like, what capacity do we have for storing things? We want products to be as fresh and like ready as possible. Um, so, meeting the deadlines, like being honest about challenges, and I have endeavored to sort of change the way that we as the US government like engage in this manner. So, it used to be that under like US government federal procurement law, like the government cannot pay for goods that we have not received and services that have not been rendered. And in a bureaucratic, like to kind of cut through the bureaucratic tape on this, it often means that like we can't really pay deposits for things.
Mhm.
But a very effective argument that I've made is like, look, we talk this big talk about wanting to engage small businesses. Often for them to deliver at the level that we are asking them to rise to, they need deposits because they have
Mhm.
to buy materials to be able to actually produce this order. They're used to someone coming in and saying, I'll have 5 of this or 20 of that or 50 of this, not coming in and being like, I need 3,000 of this. Like, that's a big challenge for a business and they can rise to that occasion, but like we have to meet them in the middle. So yeah, not posting things on social media until after the event is over, being realistic with us about timelines and challenges, uh,
Mhm.
and also some degree of patience because as much as I would love a world where I find some cool business and I'm like, yeah, this is great, let's do this. I'm not the end all be all final authority on things. Like,
Mhm.
unsurprisingly, it has to go through this approval chain. And depending on the event, maybe that approval chain exists just within my building. But, often if it involves the president or first lady, it has to go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And
Mhm.
sometimes that takes time for them because there are different things going on. And, it's things like a war in Ukraine, a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico,
Mhm.
real challenges. And we work to get decisions as quickly as possible. But I think this is like just a real challenge that people need to be mindful of that when you do engage with the government, like it just takes time to get there. And we will get there, but that can be frustrating along the way. And I understand that for small businesses, you have like production timelines you're trying to meet and, these, challenging budgets you're trying to manage. Um, but patience with us, like we will get there and it will be cool. And like we almost always continue to utilize businesses that we have engaged with once and also refer them to other parts of the government.
Mhm. And the first time is always the hardest, right? Once you get the first one successful, it's you're a known quantity. That stuff, other opportunities will arise. And I think it sounds like a main takeaway here is right, be clear communication, right? Very upfront. Don't say you can do a thing if you can't. Don't do a thing that you didn't say you were going to do, and following the rules of the road. This is a different kind of engagement than you maybe are used to. I mean, if you're honestly, it sounds a lot like working with an importer in a foreign country in my experience of, hey, we have, here's how we generally work. You have to work with us a little bit here. We need the product as fresh as possible. So please try to make sure you're doing this in a way like we're going to do the best here. And if there's going to be some flexibility, like, hey, if I said I was going to get 10,000 units off of you and maybe we'll do it across 2 flavors if that's the way it's got to be, but like we're gonna work through this, right? So
Yeah.
it's
And and that has certainly been something where like as much as I can spread the impact over a company's inventory, like I will always seek to do that. Like, you know, like with the Bite Society example that I offered, like rather than just being like, hey, can we have, X thousand of this type of cookie? It was like,
Mhm.
can we have 400 of that cookie, 400 of this cookie, 400 of that? And like I have learned that that is a lot easier for a company to absorb if you were like spreading things more equitably across their inventory and their offerings rather than just like slamming things down on one like very specific target. So we will
Yeah.
always be flexible. We will always take recommendations. Like if there are things that we haven't considered, um, you know, like often, because sometimes we'll have like different tiers of things that we are pursuing, like like we'll have a higher tier for people at the leader or minister level, and like a lower tier for like your everyone else level. And so sometimes, like, even if it's the same product but it's like packaged and elevated differently, like those are easy ways that we can be flexible and adaptive to working with a small business.
Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know, hearing about your kind of awareness of these issues that companies face, right? Spreading things across different units, right? That is a very real thing, right? Especially if you have standing orders domestically and you say, well, my batch size is only this big and can I do that? Well, right. So it's ask those questions, right? If you do get an opportunity, say, these are my realistic constraints. Don't say you can do it and then come up short. You're gonna, that's not a great way to endear yourself to somebody. So ask the question, be realistic about what your constraints are. And don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Make this work. I think that in general, it sounds like you really want to make this work for companies in practice, because in the end, everyone's going to be happier if like, if you get something that's 90% of the way there, but actually executed.
And I will never have hard feelings if a company is like honest and forthcoming with me about challenges and able to say something like, look, like the packaging that we use, like, normally we get it from this place, and like we have had like it's been on back order for like 3 months. Like, would you be willing to, you know, use this different type of packaging? Like, could we pivot to this different direction where it's still the same product, it's just presented differently? Like, the more honest that a company is, and frankly, just like vulnerable and trusting that like we're not trying to pull a fast one on you, but like we have like real challenges that we are trying to work through as well. Like, the more adaptive and flexible we can be in working through like getting to yes on something.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. Before I get us towards wrapping up here, somebody had a question. Somebody has a specialty coffee business that's been kind of in this culinary diplomacy space with the US, EU, Canada for a while now, and they were interested in sort of how to get engaged with the programs that you run. Is this something, if somebody says, "Hey, these are cool opportunities," is there a way to like opt in or just subscribe to something to kind of be on your radar, or what's the best way for somebody to engage with you all?
Yeah, I mean, especially if it is like a DMO or a business development council, like putting that product on their radar, like they can reach out to us, they can say like, hey, here's something for you to keep in mind. And it may not be next week, it may not be next month, it might be a year down the road, before we have an opportunity to, but we always like knowing like what are the options out there on the field for us. Like, if we have this foreign policy engagement opportunity and we're able to highlight and showcase, American chefs, American farmers, American producers, whatever that may be, um, it's always helpful to know what those options are. And it may not be something that the Department of State, has within a month, but it might be something that the Department of Commerce has within a month, or
Mhm.
the US Trade Representative has, or, you know, one of our embassies is reaching out to say like, hey, we really want to like do a program on coffee or on barbecue or on
Mhm.
um there was a chef that we sent to Japan, who he is a predominantly like, so he's a Mexican American chef, who works with like heritage grains, and like
Mhm.
that's something that like the USDA and the Foreign Ag Service was trying to get more into Japan and into like the conversation there. And so like, there's all of these opportunities that come up in the course of things. But you know especially once we work with an individual, like we will continue to have that relationship and that will kind of be on our radar. But as far as potentials, like it's always helpful, like, I have regular conversations with friends at DMOs and business development councils to say like, hey, like, is there any cool new things that have come on your radar recently? And they're always forthcoming with telling me about that. So like these folks that, you join these associations and you join these councils and these commissions and et cetera, like let them do the work for you, because like I promise you they are doing it.
Hmm.
We do hear from these folks about like new opportunities for us to potentially tap into. Just because we're not reaching out, it doesn't mean we're not interested. It just means the right opportunity hasn't presented itself yet.
Yeah.
But in my experience, they always do come along.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, yeah, working your way through these channels and different types of opportunities. Heck, if you're interested in exporting and you're doing these things, and if you're in the Virginia region, right, being plugged into SUSTA, the organization that helps, American grown ag and ag value add products access foreign markets. Well, maybe there's a story to tell there of, hey, you have a prime minister visiting from this country. Well, do you know my product's available in that country? Well, that's part of the story to tell of like, people, turns out that people in Colombia love my mayonnaise. Okay, well, who knew? That's a very interesting story. Well, maybe you'll get featured. I know there's too many variables at play to kind of, for
Yeah.
an individual company to stay on the radar, but going
Yeah.
through these opportunities, like thinking about what these groups that you're a member of, right? Making the most of your membership of those groups.
Yeah.
That's They're there for that.
Like one of my like favorite stories, because I know we're kind of coming close to time, and I feel like this is like a good like kind of wind down wrap up of,
Yeah,
you know,
please.
checking interesting boxes for an opportunity. So we were hosting President Yoon of South Korea for a state visit. And again, like when we bring in a chef, like there's always a list of options that we'll kind of consider things from. And ultimately, like, for a state dinner, the final choice is the first lady. For a state luncheon, the final choice is the vice president. And so we ended up choosing a man by the name of Angel Barato, Black Hispanic American, to
Mhm.
be the guest chef. And you know, that may have seemed like an interesting choice, but again, the importance of like people having their story out there, like not only is he the celebrated chef of the restaurant Anju here in DC, which is a Korean restaurant, the way that he became interested in all things Korean culture was his parents served in the armed forces when he was growing up, and they were posted to our American military bases in Korea. And so
Mhm.
he grew up immersed in Korean culture all around him. And so because we were celebrating 70 years of the US Korea relationship, so much of which has this like military tie-in, it was such an obvious choice. And for things like that, like we never want to serve like Korean food to the president of Korea, or, Indian food to the prime minister of India. We want these dishes to be more American in orientation, but we never have an issue with them being Korean inspired or having Indian influences or Japanese touches. That's always kind of the things that we are seeking for. But again, I think it really highlights the importance that in the world of diplomacy, like being able to tell that story is always going to be a real deciding factor for us when we are looking for small businesses to engage.
Yeah. And I think I mean, going back to the very beginning here, right? This is all about finding more points of connection. And that is thankfully something that food and beverage companies are all about. So, yeah,
Yeah.
take that same mindset and apply it to a broader scale. And I hope that companies that are tuning in today are going to find new ways to reach audiences and, think about the big picture. But
Yeah.
Tyler, it has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time and insights here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Chris. This was amazing as always. And I want to thank everyone who attended today. You will receive an email with a link to this recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing at virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we hope to see you all at our next session. Take care, everyone.